Hello, everyone. I'm your narrator from Grave Hush, and I'm here to help you unwind tonight. I know many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now get cozy, take a deep breath, let your body sink into the stillness. It's time to relax and let the story carry you into sleep. Our first story tonight. Let's begin. I fell in love with a nice guy. Things were going well until I found a locked room in his house. We met at the National Gallery, which was holding a special exhibit displaying music from around the world. "Do you play?" I spun around, startled by the sudden presence of a stranger by my side, and came face to face with a pair of deep brown eyes, dark and unblinking. "What?" I backed up slightly. "Music. I noticed you were looking at that for a while." He motioned towards the instrument behind the glass viewing box. "Oh, yeah. I turned towards the exhibit, then back at him. "I mean, no, not that. That's like a zither or something, but yes, I played a bunch of instruments growing up. I did a degree in classical music, actually. But I mostly just teach piano now. Anyway, what about you?" I finally noticed my babbling enough to cut myself off. I couldn't help it. There was just something about him. He had a natural presence unlike anyone I'd ever met before. And those lashes, very long for a man. He laughed. No. I tried piano once. My teacher said I didn't have the dexterity." He wiggled his fingers in my face as if to demonstrate. Beams of ambient overhead lighting caught the silver rings on his fingers. Tasteful. Artsy. I noticed his outfit for the first time that night. A crisp black button-down, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, bottom tucked into a pair of tailored trousers. Shiny loafers, black leather trench draped over one arm. Here was a man with a wicked sense of style, and there it was, that shiver of electricity, the jolt of attraction that instantly tore down my walls. "Maybe you just haven't found the right teacher," he smirked. "I'd love to hear you play sometime." And that's how we ended up at my apartment that evening. Him drinking wine, one arm propped up against the top of my Yamaha piano, gazing down as my fingers danced across the keys. I was playing Chopin. He was mesmerized. "I wish I could be as talented as you," he murmured as the piece drew to a close and I lifted my hands from the keys. "You could make it big, you know. You're good enough for the National Orchestra or even headlining your own show someday. You're just as good as the concert pianist I saw last week, maybe better." "Oh no, I couldn't," I laughed. "It takes a lot of time and energy to do tours and perform every night, and I just don't have that in me. I'm probably not good enough anyways." "I disagree." He took my hand in his, delicately rubbing my fingers. "You have an amazing gift." His name was Adam. He'd graduated university with 4 different bachelor's degrees and dabbled in different industries. As a scientist in computational cancer genomics, then as a software engineer at Google, then a blockchain security researcher in a crypto firm. By the time we met, he was a hedge fund manager and was on the board of several businesses he'd co-founded. As if that ambition wasn't enough, he was also a chess grandmaster and semi-pro tennis player on the side. And somehow, somewhere, in between work and meetings and trainings and games, he carved out time for dates with me in his busy schedule. Little old me. Every date ended back in my apartment with me serenading him on my piano until, loosened and disoriented from the wine, we tumbled into my bed, the outside world shrinking to the rhythm of our breaths. He felt like a fantasy come to life, but even when a tiny inconvenient part of me wondered what the catch was, the rest of me silenced it with a giddy flutter. One night, breathless and satiated, he cradled me tightly against his chest and murmured into my ear, "You are the most precious thing to me, you know that? Even more than your career and your tennis trophies?" I teased. "This feels too good to be true." His thumb carefully traced the outline of my fingers. "You're unbelievable. You know how many girls dream of this? A successful guy that's also nice and attentive and loving. I can't believe you make time for me amongst everything." He lifted my hands up to his lips, planting big, sloppy kisses on each of my fingers in rapid succession, making me giggle in response. "Well, get used to it, sweetheart." He suddenly went still and serious. "Actually, I've had something on my mind. I'd like for you to move in with me, if you're ready, that is." I wasn't. We were 3 weeks in, and as I realized in that moment, I hadn't even been over to his apartment before. He seemed to sense my apprehension and quickly sought to appease me. "No pressure. Maybe you should come over to mine for our next date. Check the place out, no strings attached. I promise." "Okay," I whispered, feeling slightly relieved. I felt his body relax under mine. He stroked my fingertips lovingly. "I can't wait." 3 days later, I found myself standing in the living room of his penthouse apartment, utterly slack-jawed. It was the nicest house I'd ever been in, so sleek and polished it felt almost like a showroom. The main room had an open-plan living space with a modern kitchen, a huge L-shaped couch, and a state-of-the-art entertainment system, all contained within floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A 35th floor view. In the center of it all was a glass and stainless steel spiral staircase leading to the second floor. Right underneath the staircase, a brand new grand piano. "For you, my love. For our new life together," he'd said. The most impressive thing, though, was probably his extensive fine art collection. Paintings of every size and style and period adorned every wall, the grandest one being the huge Renaissance-style painting by the dining table. 6 feet by 4 feet, nestled in a thick, gilded gold frame, it featured a series of nude women clustered on a cobblestone path amid a lush gardenscape. God, it must have cost a fortune. I'd only seen paintings like this in museums. As he stood in the kitchen making us dinner and drinks, I took the opportunity to explore further. On the second floor was a series of doors lining a central corridor. 2 on the left, a guest bedroom and study room, and 1 on the right, master bedroom. The guest and master were identical. Same size, same walk-in wardrobe, same ensuite bathroom. Same door next to the vanity. In the guest room, it led directly into the study, but in the master bedroom, it was locked. Strange. I peered through the keyhole, but all I saw was a red glow emanating from within. Curious, I jangled the doorknob a second time and rapped lightly on the door. Searching for something? I nearly jumped out of my skin at his sudden appearance behind me. He chuckled and handed me my cocktail glass. An olive bobbed around the bottom of the glass as I swirled the clear liquid, peering out at me, stretching and distorting as it moved. "What's in there?" I motioned towards the locked door. "Just a storage room." He took a sip of his drink. "Your storage room has red lighting?" I retorted. He set his glass on the vanity. "Dinner's almost ready." Why is he deflecting? It feels like you're hiding something from me. "We can talk about this later." "Well, I'm here right now, and we're right by the door." He stared at me long and hard, then realized I wasn't going to budge. "Fine." He produced a small gold key on a belt chain, twisted it in the lock, and opened the door. For a second, all I saw was red. Red floor, red walls, red ceiling, no windows. The same red foam tiles lined the walls and ceiling, soundproofing. In the middle of the room was a contraption that almost looked like a dentist chair, but finished in rich black leather. On the extensions where it seemed one's arms and legs were supposed to lay, there were thick polished steel rings bolted into the structure. from which hung heavy leather straps with buckles and clasps. Lining one wall of the room were two large metal cupboards, and right above them was a series of framed portrait photographs, all of women I didn't recognize. For a moment, as I gazed upon one of the photographs, I felt a feeling of recognition I couldn't quite place. Just as quickly as he opened it, the door shut again. "It's, for sex," he mumbled, his face taking on a ruddy flush. "A sex chair. I dabble in BDSM, if you've heard of it. Look, I didn't want to scare you away, okay? I know it's a lot and you were already hesitant to move in with me. I didn't want to scare you off. I didn't know when to tell you. Oh. And no, you don't have to use it ever. Not now, not ever. I promise I won't pressure you. It's just a stupid chair. Now please, can we please go downstairs and have dinner?" Downstairs, the air was perfused with the rich, heady scent of cooked meat. A slab of steak rested atop a wire rack, dripping with fat and juice. Oily brown liquid pooled in the tray beneath. He pulled the roasted vegetables from the oven next, potatoes and asparagus lightly charred, sizzling and popping in the pan. The smell of butter clouded the air, moist and cloying. "I didn't know you could cook." The meat squelched as his knife cleaved through it. Dark liquid stained the wooden chopping block. He smiled, seemingly relieved I wasn't bringing up the red room. "Always cut against the grain. I learned it from a friend. It's like second nature now." Perched gingerly on a stool across the kitchen island, I nervously watched him carve the meat. In any other circumstance, this would have been romantic. Sexy, even. Now the vicious dissection before me filled my gut with a queasy premonition. It occurred to me for the first time in weeks that I barely knew him. I didn't know about the kink. I didn't know about the cooking. I was sitting in a stranger's kitchen, in a stranger's house. It was like the air had been instantly sucked out of the room. A chill ran up my legs. Suddenly, the luxurious finishings felt cold, the paintings lifeless, the cavernous space foreboding and ominous. But that's when I noticed it, the large Renaissance painting from earlier, the one with the nude women. In the middle of the cluster, a woman was sat on the ground playing chess. She had short, dark, curly hair, deep dimples, and a mole on her left cheek. I'd seen her before. Even when painted in the Renaissance style, it was unmistakable. That mole, those dimples, the roundness of her cheeks. I'd just seen a real-life photograph of her, framed and hanging in the locked room upstairs. "How is it?" I looked down at my plate and hastily stuffed a piece of asparagus into my mouth. "Great!" His eyes studied my face carefully. Then he nodded and went back to his meal. From my seat at the dining table, I could see the large Renaissance painting looming behind him. I counted the women, 10 in total. "Did I tell you after high school I went traveling?" He seemed to be trying to break the uneasy atmosphere. "I backpacked all over Asia, Mumbai, Bali, Singapore, Hanoi. I even spent a week in China. You ever been to China?" "No," I mumbled. I'm pretty sure there were also 10 portraits upstairs. He speared a potato with his knife, gesturing it about as he spoke. "I'll bring you along someday. China's great. When I was in Hangzhou, I went to a TCM museum, traditional Chinese medicine." He paused for a second, then lowered his voice and continued slower than before. "Did you know that in TCM they believe the appearance of foods can determine their health benefits?" I shook my head feebly. "Okay, sure. They could just be art. But why have photos of random women in a sex room? And who even are these women? Take a walnut, for example." He leaned forward in his chair, a glint in his eyes. "A walnut looks just like a brain. So for centuries, TCM practitioners believed eating walnuts would nourish our brains way before modern science proved the same. Isn't that crazy? And yet so simple, so intuitive, so smart." The women in the painting all seemed to be taking part in a different activity from the others. At one end, a curvy blonde carried a bundle of bread and fruit. You can learn so much while traveling. After Asia, I flew to South America. At the other, a petite brunette held a leather drawstring pouch brimming with coins and went on this crazy 3-day ayahuasca retreat down in Brazil. The tallest woman stared down at a parchment scroll, intently scribing equations. I met a shaman, or maybe I hallucinated him, I don't know. Every living being has a soul, an essence, he said. In consciousness, your essence flows through your blood. The line of women started from the leftmost edge of the painting and ended somewhere near the center. The right half only had the background painted in. Really makes you think, doesn't it? For centuries, cultures all around the world obsessed over the connection between our food, our bodies, and our souls. And what did we come up with over here? He chuckled, shoving another forkful of steak into his mouth. He was chewing with his mouth open, his teeth gnashed together, tearing at the sinewy flesh. Red juices dribbled from the corner of his lips. Then again, you know what they say. All at once, he seemed to be growing infinitesimally small, the table stretching out for miles in between us. I blinked. The ceiling grew taller, then compressed, then disappeared altogether. The Renaissance painting warped as the walls twisted and spun around the women's distorted faces. I stopped chewing. The potatoes felt cold and starchy between my teeth. You are what you eat. My heart sank, and the floor gave in beneath my feet. I blinked awake, groggy, dizzy, and confused. My nose twitched uncomfortably. The air smelled faintly sterile and metallic. I tried to rub my eyes, but my arms, heavy and unresponsive, wouldn't obey. As my eyes finally adjusted to the light, I realized I was back in the red room, lying with my back against the leather chair, arms and legs bound tightly to the chair by restraints. My head, too, was held firmly in place. I could taste the rubber of the gag in my mouth. In an instant, the events of the night came rushing back to me. The drinks, the room, the women, the cooking, the awkward dinner, the dinner. Shit, he must have put something in the food. Almost as if on cue, the door creaked open. Good, you're awake. We can finally begin. The door locked shut behind him. There was the sound of squeaky wheels on tile and metal clanging against metal. He finally came into my field of vision. He was wearing surgical scrubs and pushing a little metal trolley. On it, an assortment of instruments lay polished and gleaming in the lamplight. Scalpels, forceps, scissors, retractors, pliers. A saw. I was on the butcher's block and there was nowhere to run. The panic and desperation that followed was too much to bear. I tugged at the restraints, but they were done up so tightly I could feel them eating into my skin. You know, it'll go a lot easier if you just cooperated. Oh, but I know you girls, always so feisty. He turned to me with a knowing smirk and caught me glancing up towards the portraits on the wall. No, you aren't the first. He snapped on a pair of surgical gloves. The dizzying smell of alcohol suffocated the air as he began sterilizing the tools. A cold, hard knot solidified in my gut, twisting tighter with each frantic tug I gave to the restraints. They were all once overlooked. He threw me a pitiful glance, like you. But then they got to be part of something bigger than themselves. Better. Now they are celebrated, admired, embraced. Now their gifts can't be ignored. I started pulling at the restraints more violently, but the more I thrashed in the seat, the tighter the restraints felt. I could feel my skin burning from the friction. Tears pricked at my eyes. He sighed in the face of my resistance. Let's face it, your talents are wasted on being a music teacher. I can make something of your gifts, put you on a real stage, sell albums. You'll finally be recognized. We will be something great, you'll see. He slid a rolling metal stool out of one of the large cupboards and came to sit by me. He brushed stray strands of hair away from my face and caressed my cheek. All I felt was revulsion. "Don't be scared," he murmured softly in my ear. "I'll take good care of you." I felt the sting of something sharp pressing lightly against my left wrist. I squeezed my eyes shut. Tears trickled down my cheeks, intermingling with beads of sweat. I held my breath. Then the saw began slicing into my wrist. The pain was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. The saw chewed through muscle and sinew, 1,000 sharp metal teeth catching, pulling, then tearing through my flesh. It felt like my hand was on fire. Every forward and backward stroke of the blade ignited every nerve ending in my wrist, sending jolts of blinding white-hot pain radiating up my arm. A raw, primal scream clawed its way up my throat. I barely recognized my own voice. Blood gushed from the wound, a hot, slick torrent that dripped rhythmically into a plastic bucket below. I sobbed and writhed and begged for mercy, but he just kept going. Back and forth the blade went shredding through me. Then he hit bone. The high-pitched shriek of metal on bone was deafening. Even through the agonizing pain and delirium, I still heard every horrific note. He stood up at this point to get more leverage. Bone crunched and splintered under his weight as he dragged the saw back and forth, grunting and wheezing. A labor of love. All I could do was scream. I must have passed out several times from the excruciating pain, but eventually I awoke to him placing my second hand into a cooler right next to the first. Viscous blood droplets kissed the fresh bed of ice cubes below, delicately spiderwebbing outwards across their slick surfaces. I clenched and unclenched my hands. I felt them grasp at the air. But when I looked down, there was nothing there. He inserted a cannula in my arm. Exhausted, I didn't protest. He pulled the chair back in and sat by my side, watching as dark red blood filled up the clear tube and dripped into a bag. Eve was my first, he smiled wistfully. She was on the swim team in college, had real talent, great lung capacity, which I lacked. But then I heard she was quitting swimming to focus on some other shit. Imagine wasting all that natural talent. I thought, if you're not using it, then I will. So I took her lungs and ribs, and I ate them. Oh my God, I stifled a sob. Nausea bubbled in my gut. My hands were his dinner. And I became a better swimmer, he grinned, patting his ribcage proudly. I was surprised it actually worked. Those TCM idiots had been eating walnuts for centuries when they could have been doing this. Though of course it took until Carly for me to realize I had to drink all the blood too, to complete the transfer. It's much more effective that way, just like what the shaman said. My vision was starting to go hazy. I'd already lost so much blood. He seemed to notice I was fading too and leaned down closer to my face. "See you soon, sweetheart," he whispered. "I can't wait for all that we'll achieve together." I live in a house with too many people. I can't hear them or see them, but I know, like me, they're very much alive. In his hands, I find solace. I slot right into them. We play fugues and etudes and nocturnes. My fingers dance over the keys like it's second nature. I hate that he was right. Where I thought I couldn't make it before, where I thought I wasn't good enough, he simply waltzed in and demanded to be seen and heard. He has a successful music YouTube channel now. He's done several guest appearances in National Symphony concerts. He released an album. Could I have done it all along? Would I have garnered the same trust and attention as quickly as he had? Did I ever want to? We are his hands, his legs, his tongue, his ribs, his brain. We are his talents, his art, his successes, his accolades. But as far as the world is concerned, he is the ultimate Renaissance man. So far, the best part about being someone's hands is that when they accidentally fall asleep with their hands on an open laptop, you may just be able to go onto Reddit and type out your story. Even if using borrowed fingers, even if on borrowed time, my voice still fills the pages. It's bitter comfort that, however small, there are parts of me I get to keep mine. Story 1 ends here. Now, let's begin story 2. My family has a rite of passage where we drive down a specific highway. I just found my grandfather's journal, and now I know it's not a tradition, it's a curse. The men in my family have a tradition, a rite of passage, my dad called it. When a boy becomes a man, he takes a journey in my grandfather's car, a cross-country trip alone to connect with the past. My grandfather died before I was born, so for me it was supposed to be a way to connect with the man I never knew, a way to understand my roots. Now I think it was a test, and I don't know if I passed or failed. The car itself is a relic, a 1968 Ford Falcon, a heavy beast of seafoam green steel and chrome. The inside smells of old vinyl, stale pipe tobacco, and something else. Something faintly metallic and sad like old blood. There's no GPS, no Bluetooth, no screen of any kind. Just a rumbling engine, a steering wheel the size of a ship's helm, and an old AM/FM radio with a single crackling speaker in the dash. I set off 2 weeks ago with a worn paper map unfolded on the passenger seat beside me. The first few days were incredible. Just me, the open road, and the ghosts of old rock and roll on the radio. It was the time for me to go through the road. Looking at the map, I saw it. A thin red line designated a state highway that cut a perfectly straight 200-mile slash through a vast dark green patch of national forest. The turnoff was unassuming, just a faded green sign pointing down a 2-lane blacktop that was immediately swallowed by a canopy of ancient towering pine trees. The air grew cooler. The sunlight dimmed, filtered through the dense needles overhead. Within 10 minutes, I hadn't seen another car. The road was a lonely, empty ribbon unfurling into the wilderness. That's when the radio started acting up. At first, it was just static, the familiar hiss of a signal lost to distance and geography. But then, through the static, a voice crackled to life. It was a news anchor, his voice crisp and urgent, talking about naval blockades and tensions in Cuba. The broadcast lasted for about 30 seconds, then dissolved back into static. Weird. I twisted the dial, but all I got was more hissing. A few miles later, it happened again. A jingle, upbeat and cheerful, for a brand of soda I vaguely remembered my parents talking about, one that hadn't been on shelves since the 70s. I dismissed it as atmospheric bounce. I'd heard of it happening in remote areas. Radio waves from God know where, trapped in the ionosphere, sometimes bouncing back down in just the right conditions. It was a strange atmospheric quirk, a cool story to tell later, but the broadcasts kept coming, and they started to change. They became more intimate. I heard the hushed, whispered conversation of 2 young lovers, their words full of nervous excitement. I heard a mother humming a lullaby, a gentle, wordless tune full of so much love it made my chest ache. I heard a heated argument between 2 men, their voices sharp and angry, though I couldn't make out the words. They weren't broadcasts anymore, they something else. The feeling in the car shifted from curiosity to a low, humming unease. The road stretched on, empty and unchanging. Then up ahead I saw a building. It was an old, dilapidated diner, its sign faded and peeling, its windows boarded up. It looked like it had been abandoned for half a century. As I drove past, the radio erupted. It wasn't a voice this time. It was a cacophony of sound, the clatter of cutlery on ceramic plates, the sizzle of a grill, the low murmur of conversation, and over it all, the clear, cheerful voice of a waitress asking, "What'll it be, hun?" It was so real, so vibrant, I could almost smell the greasy spoon coffee. It lasted for the 10 seconds it took to pass the diner, and then it vanished. replaced by the familiar hiss of static. My heart was pounding. That wasn't some physical phenomena. A few miles later, I passed a wide clearing with a single massive gnarled oak tree in the center. As the car drew level with it, the radio crackled again. This time it was the sound of children laughing, pure, unadulterated joy. And underneath it, the steady, rhythmic creak, creak of a tire swing. I looked at the tree. There was no swing, just a thick, heavy branch empty against the gray sky. The realization hit me hard. The radio wasn't picking up random signals from the sky. It was picking them up from the ground, from the road itself. It was playing back moments, memories that had happened in the exact locations I was passing. This entire desolate stretch of highway. It was a recording. And this car, my grandfather's car, was the playback device. A morbid curiosity, stronger than my fear, took hold. I started to experiment. I slowed the car to a crawl. I passed an old, collapsed barn, its roof caved in, its timbers rotting. The radio filled with the frantic, desperate voice of a man praying, begging for mercy as the sound of a roaring thunderstorm raged around him. The storm wasn't real. The sky above me was a flat, overcast gray. But in the car, I could almost feel the thunder shake my bones. I stopped the car completely. The prayer faded. I put it in reverse, backed up 10 feet. The prayer started again mid-sentence. I was controlling it. I was scrubbing through the timeline of this place. The initial wonder of it began to curdle into something much darker. The memories weren't all picnics and laughter. They couldn't be. Up ahead, the road curved sharply around a deep, rocky ravine. A rusty, mangled section of guardrail was the only sign of trouble. As I approached, a knot of ice formed in my stomach. I almost turned the radio off. I couldn't. The static gave way to the screech of tires on wet pavement. It was a horrifying, high-pitched squeal of rubber losing its grip. It was followed by a single, sharp female scream, a sound of pure, final terror, cut off abruptly by a sickening crunch of metal on rock. And then silence. A profound, heavy, listening silence that was worse than the scream itself. I felt physically cold. The dread wasn't just in my head anymore. It was a physical sensation, seeping into me from the old vinyl of the seats, through the steering wheel into my hands. This wasn't just a recording. The emotions were real. The pain, the fear, the joy. They were imprinted here. I had to get out. Just for a minute. I pulled the car over onto the gravel shoulder, my hands shaking. I needed fresh air. I needed to escape the claustrophobic intimacy of these ghosts. I killed the engine, and the silence was a relief. I sat there for a long time, just breathing. My eyes scanned the simple, primitive dashboard. The glove compartment. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe I was just looking for a distraction. Inside, beneath a stack of old gas receipts and a tire pressure gauge, was a small, leather-bound journal. It was my grandfather's. His name was embossed in faded gold on the cover. With trembling fingers, I opened it. The pages were filled with his neat, looping handwriting. The first few entries were about the car, about his love for driving. Then, the entries started to be about this road. October 12th, 1971. Started my rite of passage today. A state highway that cuts through the old forest. The map calls it Route 9, but it feels older than that. There's a strange quality to the air here. The radio keeps picking up old signals like echoes. I must be coming back this way. October 15th, 1971, it's not echoes. It's the road. I've started calling it the hollow. It holds on to things, voices, moments. I passed the old Miller farm today and heard old man Miller yelling at his son clear as day. Miller's been dead 20 years. This road, it remembers. I flipped through the pages. The entries became more frequent, more obsessive. He was driving the road regularly, listening, cataloging the memories he found. He was as fascinated as I had been, but then the tone of the final entries changed. The neat cursive became a frantic, almost illegible scrawl. September 3rd, 1992. I was wrong. I was a fool. The road doesn't just play back, it records, it takes. I was out here last week after a terrible fight with my wife. I was so angry, so full of rage. Today I drove past the same spot, and I heard it. I heard myself. I heard my own words, my own anger, echoing back at me from the static. It took a piece of me. It recorded my pain, and now it plays it back. Any strong emotion, any peak of human experience, it gets imprinted. It feeds the hollow. The last entry was written on a page that was tear-stained and smudged. September 5th, 1992. It's our blood. It has to be. I found the old county records, the ones they keep in the church basement. This land wasn't empty. Before it was a forest, before it was a road, it belonged to a tribe. Our ancestors, when they first settled this valley, they cleared them out. That was the phrase in the old letters. Cleared them out. It wasn't a treaty. It wasn't a sale. It was a slaughter, a genocide. We built our lives on their graves, and this road cuts right through the heart of their burial ground. It's not just playing back memories, it's playing back their suffering, an endless loop of their final agony, and it's a curse. For us, for our bloodline, the car, this damn car, it's an amplifier. It attunes us to their pain. This rite of passage. It isn't about connecting with us, it's about binding us to them, to their suffering. The road demands a witness from the bloodline of the usurpers. It demands we listen. I dropped the journal. My blood had turned to ice, the rite of passage, the connection to the past. It was all a lie, a beautiful romantic story to cover up a horrifying, ugly truth. I looked up into the rearview mirror. The road behind me seemed to shimmer, the image of the forest wavering like a heat haze. The car, which had been running perfectly, suddenly sputtered, coughed. The engine died. The radio crackled to life, but it wasn't a memory this time. It was a low, expectant hum, a waiting sound, and in the mirror I saw them. Far behind me, where the road met the horizon, figures began to appear. Dozens of them, then hundreds. They were on horseback, dark, wrathful silhouettes against the gray sky. They began to ride towards me, moving with an unnatural speed. They were screaming, a sound that came not through the radio but through the very air, a chorus of rage and pain in a language I didn't know but understood perfectly. I looked to the sides of the road, to the forest I had thought was empty. It wasn't empty anymore. Figures were stumbling out from between the trees, women, children, old men. Their bodies were torn, mutilated. Their faces were masks of unending agony. And they were all looking at me. They weren't just ghosts. They were accusations. They were raising their spectral, broken hands, pointing at me, their mouths open in silent screams that I could feel in my soul. My own scream was a raw, terrified sound. I turned the key in the ignition, praying. The engine caught, roaring back to life. I stomped on the accelerator, and the old Falcon fishtailed on the gravel before finding purchase on the asphalt. I flew down that road, the army of spectral riders gaining on me in the rearview mirror, the suffering faces of the dead flashing past my windows. The road ahead seemed to stretch into infinity. The car rattled and shook, pushed to its absolute limit. The humming from the radio grew louder, more intense, a sound that felt like it was trying to shake my skull apart. I saw a sign up ahead, a modern reflective green sign for the interstate, the end of the hollow. I shot past it, crossing some invisible line, and everything stopped. The riders in my mirror vanished. The figures in the woods were gone. The humming from the radio cut out, replaced by a profound, deafening silence. I kept driving for another mile before pulling over, my body shaking so violently I could barely control the car. I sat there, gasping for air, the silence a welcome blanket. Then the radio crackled one last time. It was a voice, an old man's voice, full of a weariness so deep it felt ancient. It was a voice I'd never heard, but I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that it was my grandfather. "Now you know," he whispered, his voice a ghost in the machine. "Now you carry it too. The road remembers. The road always remembers. And one day, son, for one of us, for one of our blood, it won't be enough to just listen. One day it will claim its payment." The radio went silent, and I was alone. But I know I'm not. I can still feel it, a cold spot in my soul. The rite of passage is complete. I've connected with my ancestors, and I am now bound to their crime, a witness to their sin, just waiting for the day the road decides it's my turn to become another one of its recordings. Story 2 ends here. Now, we drift into Story 3. Slumberjack Woods. The logging industry might not seem like an action-packed world of politics and schemes, but you'd be surprised. Where I used to work, there were about 4 different companies all trying to put each other out of business. There was also an adjacent area that bordered on a national park. So yeah, if you looked at it from above, it all looks like forest. But there are a lot of invisible lines to look for. I was part of a regulatory watchdog. All the companies in the area called on us as an independent third party to settle land disputes and accusations of overstepping regulatory boundaries. Basically, we were the checks and balances that made sure they all played nice. That this particular case landed on my desk was a matter of contention. The last 2 cases that had been dropped in my lap ended up being lengthy and unnecessary legal battles. So my supervisor had been putting off giving me field work for about 2 months. There was some pressure to vacate my seat entirely, and I wasn't eager to make a fool of myself for a 3rd time. So whatever this was, it had to go off without a hitch. I was given a couple of files, satellite images, statements, interviews, and witness testimony. There was this space at the edge of company property that had been cut down and cleared out illegally. Insurance companies had demanded a complete third-party review before they agreed to a payout. There was also an issue with the nearby park services, as damage had been done to protected land, making the rangers suspect that this was either self-inflicted or the work of an organized third party. Now, making arrests or proceeding with a formal criminal investigation is the work of the police, but my job was to give them a neutral and objective perspective, something they could point to as evidence of suspicion of foul play. An acre or 2 might sound like a lot of land to cover, but when you're dealing with multiple sites of about 15 to 25 acres separately, it quickly falls under the radar. Given how close this land was to the edge of the property, I suspect they hadn't intended to clear it anytime soon, so they must have stumbled upon this by accident. I drove out early Monday morning. I had a meeting with one of the foremen working in the area to corroborate the statements I'd been given. And it all checked out. They hadn't been operating in the area, there were no witnesses who could say what had happened, and no one had investigated it close enough to cause any obstruction. We were good to go. I was put in contact with an assistant foreman named Michael, a very driven man in his early 30s, whose head seemed to have been fused with the mandatory white helmet they made us wear. He had this handlebar mustache that made me think of cartoonish uncle. I met him by a signal orange Jeep with the company logo printed in all black. "I'm just here to get you where you need to go," he explained. "I'm not here to intrude." "I'm sure that won't be a problem," I smiled. "You know where we're headed?" "Of course, yeah. It's been the talk of the crew for a week now." "How so?" I asked. "You hear things," he explained, "like how no lumber was stolen." "What?" "Yeah," he reiterated. "No lumber's been stolen. Most of it just kinda lay there." That part had been conveniently left out of my prep work. Driving through untrained lands in a Jeep isn't as comfortable as it sounds. Sudden dips and rocks and fallen trees make for a bumpy ride, and if you're not used to it, it's gonna cost you your lunch. I was prepared enough, but I noticed Michael looking over a couple of times. He probably wasn't used to outside passengers, having spent a lot of time in the wild. And to be fair, I didn't really look the part. "I'm not sure what exactly you do," Michael admitted. "Some sort of insurance thing?" "That's part of it, yeah. But I'm mostly here to make sure everyone plays along." "They do," he said. "I mean, it's all the same guys." "What do you mean?" "I mean, there are only so many loggers in one area, you know? You quit one place, you go to another. So you all know each other, even at other logging companies?" "Yeah," he said, clutching the wheel as we barreled through a bent sapling, leaves brushing against the windows. "I'm just saying, I don't know any guy who's motivated enough to bring in a crew to cut this stuff. Which means it's an outside thing. Or something natural," I added. "Wildfire, soil degradation. It's not usually that black and white. No offense, but in my experience, it is." Michael rolled onto a half-finished road. It lined the space between the government-owned park space and the edge of the logging area. It was only meant for industry use, but it was surreal to see. This one line of asphalt in the middle of the towering woods, stretching on for as far as the eye could see. If you were to accidentally get turned around, it'd be impossible to tell which way you were going. The forest opened into a clearing on both sides of the road. It looked like a bomb had gone off. The trees were either bent, broken, or cut down. There were definite signs of human intervention with clean-cut stumps. Stepping out of the Jeep, something just felt wrong. Like we'd entered some kind of dead zone. You could taste the exposed sugary sap in the air. Normally, this space would be ripe with wildlife, but I couldn't hear a thing. No birds, no buzzing, nothing. Michael took me a bit to the side and waved at a man by the tree line. The man was clearly a park ranger, somewhere in his late 60s. He was short and had a sort of lanky build, but with the sinewy look of someone too tough to quit. Michael introduced me and the man shook my hand. "Ranger Wilson," he said. "Thought I'd give you a hand, given our circumstance." "You got an idea what's happening here?" I asked. "Area's always been quirky," he explained. "Most of the damage has been done on the park side." "How much damage are we looking at?" Ranger Wilson scratched his chin with his scrawny fingers. "About 1.5 acre on the company side, about 2 on the park side. Most people never come out this way, we were informed by our gracious neighbors." Michael excused himself from the conversation, leaving me with a walkie-talkie to call in when I needed a ride back. With Michael out of the picture, Wilson relaxed his shoulders as he took lead. "Place used to be teeming with folks back in the 70s, he explained as we walked. Called it Slumberjack Woods. Strange name. Well, they mostly went out here to get high and skinny dip in the river. There was this glade nearby that had an amazing view, perfect for hippie dippies and drum circles." "You don't sound too happy about it. Just sad to see the good times pass us by." He gave me a knowing grin with a silent explanation. I could sense who he might have been in the equation of unruly 70s teenagers. The damage done to the area was significant, but not as clear-cut as first believed. There were some trees that had been cut down with a chainsaw, others with an axe. Not all of them, though. Some were brought down by wildlife. Ranger Wilson pointed out a couple of fallen trees with fresh marks from bears. There were also signs of beavers. "Ain't a lot of beavers this far west of the river," he explained. "For them to go out of their way like this, it's strange." "You know what's happened to all the bushes and branches?" I asked. "What do you mean?" I bent down, adjusting my shoes. I pointed at one of the fallen trees, showing the damage done to the lower edges of the trunk. Branches had been broken off and removed. You can see this on a couple of trees, I said, and some of the saplings are missing entirely. I'll be damned. Good eye. According to satellite imagery, most of the damage had been done in a sort of oval shape, with the majority being on the park side. I showed it to Wilson and asked if we could check out the center. There had to be a specific point where whoever did this started, and maybe that could give us an idea of how long it had been going on. Traversing this kind of environment takes a toll, though. Fallen trees and branches and rocks. You gotta make sure you don't slip, or you'll dislocate an ankle quicker than a flash flood. Not to mention you might be dangling your toes into a viper's nest. Tough boots or not, you don't want to tempt fate more than necessary. So why Slumberjack Woods? I asked. I don't get the name. Well, when you've had a bit to smoke, you usually doze off. It's not that complicated, son. That's all? Well, a couple of folks claimed it was the best sleep of their lives, he continued. Some would come here before a big test or a job interview just to relax for a bit. Used to camp out for a day or so, listening to music and sitting by the river. I guess some places just kind of stick with you. I guess they do. We ended up by the river, following it northwest. We were somewhere around the center, but with things looking so different from what Wilson was used to, it was difficult to find any meaningful landmarks. We ended up walking straight across the clearing without seeing anything but fallen trees. Sometime after lunch, Wilson found a comfortable spot in the shade and had a sandwich. As he finished it, he leaned back and covered his face with his hat. "Give me 10 minutes," he said. "Don't stray too far." "I'll check that hill for a bit," I said. "Southwest." "All right," he sighed. 10 minutes, then I'll join you." And with that, he was out like a light. What a gift. I took a short walk. There was a hill not too far from the river, which gave me a great overview. It was strange seeing so much empty space in the middle of such a lively area of the woods. I didn't know what to make of this. It felt like an industrial-level operation, but the signs showed a variety of tools and causes. There was no immediate answer, and that was unusual for my line of work. I remember spotting a couple of chickadees among the fallen trees, picking branches and leaves for their nest. The first signs of life I'd seen out there. As they noticed me watching, they took off westward. There was something there in the distance. I couldn't make out the details, but it was in a sort of dip between two hills. You couldn't see it from a low position, making it practically invisible unless you were at the right angle. Peculiar. I went to investigate. I could still see the hill where I'd been standing, so I could call for Wilson if necessary. But I made my way down, noticing a path. It was the first sign of movement or organized effort I'd seen. A clear path with drag marks. I rounded the edge of one of the hills and wiped some sweat off my forehead. Minnesota summers are no joke, and I had the sunscreen to prove it. I stopped dead in my tracks. The path kept dipping into a sort of crater. It was about 30 feet across and 20 or so feet deep. The entire thing was covered in fallen trees, branches, bushes, leaves, twigs, saplings, and roots. Pretty much whatever you could break off and carry, all pushed into a single massive pile. It was deceptively large. Even at this depth, the pile was tall enough to rival the surrounding hills. It would only take a couple more feet for it to be visible from all directions. I just kind of marveled at it. The effort it would take to bring this together was enormous. I looked up only to see Wilson standing on top of the westward hill. He was holding a small hand axe and dragging along a couple of branches. With little fanfare, he dropped it onto the gargantuan pile, causing a ripple of movement among the branches. A couple of chickadees took flight, and looking a bit closer, I saw a falcon, a raptor nesting alongside prey animal. "Wilson," I called out, "what are you doing?" "Huh?" He looked down at me, clutching his hand axe. What do you mean? He asked. What's with the branches? What's with this? I gestured towards the pile. Wilson turned to it, scratching his head. Jesus, he muttered. What the hell happened here? We took some pictures and investigated it. At first it just looked like a disorganized pile, but there was some sense to it. Most of the trees that had been dragged there lined the bottom and the edge, while most of the larger branches were on the inside. It was structurally sound. The outside was mostly covered in leaves and bird nests. I confirmed that yes, I could see falcons alongside chickadees and cardinals. There were also signs of raccoons, and I spotted a couple of curious eyes peering out at me. Possibly foxes. Ranger Wilson pointed out deer droppings nearby. All in all, this didn't make sense to me. Animals didn't congregate into piles, especially not a man-made one, which put a couple of things into consideration. One, that this wasn't a natural process. Two, that this wasn't man-made. All the while, I couldn't get a straight answer from Wilson about his contribution to the pile. He shrugged it off and was noticeably quieter from that point forward. That was one of the most curious things about the pile, just how quiet it was. This was a massive collection of trees and bushes teeming with life, but it was silent as a grave. No chirps or songs, no buzzing insects. I could see ants and bees crawling next to one another, carrying the occasional leaf or pine needle. I could see mice scurrying around, carrying twigs with their teeth. I walked up to the pile to look a little closer. There were holes for larger mammals to crawl through, giving it the appearance of a nest or a mound, rather than just a pile of debris. There were things living in there, no doubt. There were other stories about this place back in the day, Wilson called out from atop the hill. There was this bonfire. What about it? I asked as I peered into the nest. A lot of folks came by to build a bonfire. It was supposed to be this amazing thing to burn at the end of summer. A lot of folks came around to pile stuff on. It wouldn't happen to be this pile right here, would it? Not sure, he admitted. Area looks different now that it's all dead. But yeah, they never burned the thing. I guess they were happy enough just building it. I looked a little closer, seeing a couple of eyes reflect at me from the depth of the pile. Doesn't look all that dead to me, I muttered. Doesn't look dead at all, Wilson explained as he escorted me back to the road. The bonfire had been this idea by some of the regulars. They would come back every now and then, have a smoke, and then go chopping up something to add to the pile. Hence the jack part in Slumberjack Woods. It was just something to clear your mind, he said. Like meditation, you know. So you're saying they've been clearing this area since the 70s? Hell no, he laughed. I'm saying that's what they did back then. People have moved on. Haven't seen anyone around these parts for years. So what are you suggesting? I asked. What's happened here? He scratched his head and looked back, shaking his head. I don't have a God's honest clue, truth be told. I called Michael and waved goodbye to Wilson for now. Wilson yawned and lumbered back into the woods, following an old trail. I didn't have to wait long for Michael to pick me up with his Jeep, asking me what I'd learned as we drove off. I told him about the pile. We'll get someone to clear that out, he said. Shouldn't be too much trouble. You got any idea what it is? I asked. Looks like a lot of work. I've checked with the guys who found it, he said. A guy who used to go up there to take a nap during lunch hour. He didn't have a very good explanation. What did he say? Not much, Michael sighed. He just sort of found it. Went up there for a nap, got a bit confused, and ended up in the clearing. That happen a lot with your crew? I asked. They get confused much. Can't say they do. He pointed in the rearview mirror. The clearing could still be seen in the distance. But around that part of the woods, I guess they do. I spent most of that evening collecting my thoughts and findings. I summarized the various conclusions I could draw, but ended up with an empty line under conclusion. That was the one part I couldn't figure out. I sent what I had to my superior, knowing full and well that I'd get a stern talking to about not having an answer. Inconclusive reports had been my downfall for the Part 2 cases, and this wasn't looking to fare any better. The next day, I wasn't just meeting up with Michael. I was meeting up with about 10 of his guys, all in various vehicles. And at the forefront of it all was an excavator, with that same signal orange color and the company logo. Michael was excited to get this done and over with. I got in his Jeep as the little convoy rolled out. "They're probably not gonna want to push this issue," he said. "They don't really care about that lumber as long as no one else has been making a profit." "Well, there is no sign of that," I said. "But something's up, that's for sure." It was unreal seeing those machines roll into the clearing, bumping over fallen trees and dry stumps. A couple of people had gotten out of their Jeeps to guide it through, waving and directing it with hand signals. Getting closer to the pile, I noticed a silhouette on the hill. I looked up to see Wilson standing by a fallen tree, chucking branches onto the pile. I excused myself from Michael and got out. It took me a while to navigate the brambles, but I made it all the way atop the hill. As the crew rounded the corner and oohed and awed about the pile, Wilson was just standing there, casually throwing branches. His eyes were closed. I observed him closely. He moved slowly, but with the same confidence as always. He leaned down, broke off a branch from a tree, and threw it down the hill. I could see a couple chickadees rock back and forth as the branch landed next to their nest, but they didn't take flight. They didn't have a care in the world. I tapped Wilson on the shoulder and watched his eyes open. He groaned a little and looked down at his hands, covered in tree sap and scratches. "You all right?" I asked. "Must have nodded off," he said. "What day is it?" I wanted to tell him that's something he ought to know, but there was a tone to his voice that didn't lend itself to sarcasm. I shook off the thought and gave him a pat on the back. "You need me to call someone? You good?" "I'm good," he insisted. "I'm good." Then he saw the excavator. He looked up at me, then down at Michael and his crew. Then he was off like someone had fired a racing pistol. Wilson hurried down the hill to meet with Michael and his crew. They almost came to blows immediately. I thought the two of them knew each other pretty well, but that didn't seem to be the case. Michael argued that the pile was on company property, while Wilson argued that it could be the home to endangered species and that we couldn't do anything to it before we had a clear idea of what it was. But while they argued, the excavator crept closer. There was a sort of electricity in the air, a spark. Something didn't feel right, and I could watch the hair on my arm stand at attention like I'd dragged my feet across a rubber carpet. Michael grabbed his walkie-talkie and gave the operator the go-ahead. Wilson knocked the walkie out of his hands, and the two escalated from words to finger-pointing and getting in each other's face. Meanwhile, I listened to the walkie-talkie. "Coming up on the side now," the operator said. "Looks like a, beaver dam from hell." I could hear the whine of the machine as it lifted the arm up high, ready to be brought down. "You hear that?" the operator said. "There's something. I don't know." I tried to call Michael over, but he was too busy berating Wilson, who in turn was busy berating him back. The crew was looking worried, and the operator was sounding more worried still. The excavator's arm hung still in the air. "There's something in here," he continued. "Not like in there, but..." The operator flung his arm about as if waving away an insect. Then he did it again. And then he moved around the cabin. "Shit! There's something on the floor. There's something on..." The other crew members hurried his way as Michael looked up, asking Wilson to shut up. Then a scream. One we didn't need a walkie-talkie to hear. We all rushed forward. I saw one guy trip over something, clutching his leg. Another waved off a couple of bees. Someone got to the excavator and pulled the door open, only for a handful of snakes to spill out. The operator was unconscious, his face stung red with bees, some of which still crawled over him. His rescuers dropped him, shocked by the hissing vipers in the cabin. Rattlesnakes, it sounded like. I stopped. The guy who'd tripped started screaming about a bite, and another physically had to kick off a rodent trying to crawl up his leg. I could see things moving in the dirt, spiders and ants side by side, heading the way of the excavator like an insectoid parade. And for the first time since I got there, I could hear life, birdsong, screeching falcons. And looking up, I could see them circling the nest together like a cohesive flock, like a perfect circling halo of wings and beaks. All of them just waiting for someone to step out of line, to get a little too close. I helped in whatever way I could, and Wilson did too. 3 guys had rattlesnake bites, and the excavator operator got at least 30 or so bee stings on top of that. We had to call for an airlift to a hospital. For the rest of the afternoon, that was all we'd do, cleaning up the aftermath of what had turned into a royal clusterfuck. Michael was stuck talking to his boss, and a couple of people came out to see the pile with their own eyes. They discussed how to best get rid of it, but it wasn't gonna happen anytime soon. They were too afraid to even get close enough to move the excavator. By late afternoon, I ended up sitting next to Michael on a stump. The crew had cleared out, but I wanted a statement for my report. I got one, but after the bureaucratic minutia passed, I was left with a man that was worried for the safety of his people. "Never had a snake bite before," he said. "The occasional bee sting, sure, but this is fucked." "Logging is dangerous business," I agreed, "but yeah, this is new." "I'll be honest," he continued. "We've had some trouble. Some guys wandering off their position, someone twisting their ankle while on a walk to God knows where. Didn't say anything about that in my file. 'Cause it makes us liable," he explained. "So we shut up about it. But that thing over there, that's the core of it, all of it." "You had any sleepwalkers?" I asked. "Like more than usual?" "Apparently it wasn't as unusual as I would have been led to believe." Michael explained off the record that it had happened a couple times a week over the past few months. Some equipment would go missing too, mostly hand axes meant to clear out branches so you can reach with your chainsaw. Some folks had been found wandering the outskirts of the clearing. "It wasn't until the foreman heard about it that we decided to deal with it," he continued. "And here we are, dealing with it." Now, I could have gone back with Michael and the others, but this was turning into something I couldn't ignore. I was under enormous pressure to see this through and come to a satisfying conclusion, and I couldn't do that from behind a desk. I had to see this thing. I had to observe it with my own eyes and figure it out. I had a field kit with a small tent, a sleeping bag, and some basic necessities. I asked Michael to pick me up in the morning. He wasn't happy about it, but he figured I knew what I was doing. I think he might have had more faith in me than I did. There was no telling what was going to happen once the sun went down, but I intended to find out. So I stuck around, watching from a distance. The excavator just stood there, its signal orange arm still hanging in the air. A couple of birds had covered its joints in twigs and leaves, slowly transforming it into a makeshift metal tree. At some point, I must have nodded off. I think it was on top of that hill, just like Wilson. There isn't much to say about what happened at that time. I remember my eyes feeling heavy and my mouth being wide open. There was this weight to me, like I was sleeping under 2 feet of snow. At some point, I forced my eyes open as if trying to escape a nightmare. The sun was just about to set. Long golden shadows stretched out over the clearing, giving it the look of a quiet fire. I could see deer carefully dragging branches through the dirt, slowly moving past the excavator. Families of squirrels and rabbits rushed past my feet, pulling whatever they could along. And I was just standing there, in front of the pile, holding a hand axe. My arms ached. Then I dipped into the dark again. Despite my eyes being closed, it was easier to move. It's like something shared its vision with me, giving me a sensation of where to move and how. I remember something stinging my hand. Perhaps I cut myself on something sharp, and yet my eyes stayed close and my body limber. It wasn't so much a dream as it was an out-of-body experience. When I got too sore to continue, I crawled. I thought about the comfort of my tent, the warm sleeping bag nestled under my neck, the breathing fabric swaying in the wind, coloring my world a mild tint of cyan. But when I opened my eyes, that's not where I was. I was in the middle of the nest, resting on a pile of moss. The inside was lined with grass, leaves, and wildflowers. I specifically remember my half-open eyes looking into the dark center of a blue sunflower. My head leaned against something warm and leathery. I ran, a tired hand over it. It felt like caressing a warm tire, segmented into armor-like plates. There was this sickly sweet smell coming from it, like burnt sugar. Looking down, I thought I saw fingers sticking out of the mud. They had a similar shape, but they were arranged in a line, like the legs of a centipede. I dreamt of wandering the woods, feeling the ground shift underneath my feet, desperately looking for a safe haven, somewhere I could call home. I found this one spot, surrounded by a circle of wildflowers, and I was so relieved. Someone had built me a home. In that dream, I remember promising myself to never leave, no matter how old or how large I got. That was my home, my safe harbor away from the storm. And I would ask all my friends to make my house bigger and stronger and safer. By the time I opened my eyes for real, I was curled up inside the middle of the nest. The moss was soft under my face. The early morning summer rays tried their best to creep through the labyrinth of brambles, managing to touch me across the cheek. I looked down at my hand, where there were 2 small bite marks. It didn't hurt. It didn't even itch. It was just there. I could barely make sense of it. There was no clear point where I could have crawled inside, and I had no memory of doing so. It's like I'd closed my eyes and now I was there. Moving out in 20 minutes. The sound startled me. Turns out I still had Michael's walkie-talkie. I kept hearing updates on the walkie-talkie and a handful of people responding to one another. Something was happening and they were on the move. It didn't take long before I could hear them, and not longer still before I saw them. No excavators or bulldozers this time, just jeeps and people. I picked up the walkie-talkie and pressed it. There was no response. My voice wasn't coming through. There were at least 5 jeeps, maybe 6, all full of men with white helmets. They were coming back to finish what they'd started. I had to try and get them to turn back until we figured this out, but for that I had to make my way out of the nest. And there was no way. I was completely closed off. Michael's voice came through in the distance. He didn't need a walkie-talkie for this. "We all have our reservations," he said. "But this thing is a safety hazard. This is a measure to deal with that hazard. That's all there's to it." They had signal orange jerry cans with the company logo. But more so, they carried bottles and metal cans, homemade fire bombs. And from their holsters, I could tell a couple of them were armed. An icy panic shot through my chest. Didn't they see I was in here? How could they miss me? I tried calling out to them, but there was no response. I twisted and turned, kicking at the side of the nest, but I couldn't find my way out. The branches and twigs were packed so tight they could keep me warm through the winter if need be. I saw the first flame light up, and my voice went from a passionate plea to an animalistic screeching. There was a struggle among the crew as 2 of them stepped back, while the others lit up their fire bombs. One by one, flames took hold. The homemade explosives weren't as much firebombs as they were fire starters, but the dry leaves and branches offered little resistance. I remember watching this one wildflower catch fire mere inches from my feet. A curious blue turned a charcoal black. And as I felt the heat across my skin, I knew this was no longer a dream. I twisted and turned, I thrashed, screamed, and cut myself bloody trying to get out. The smoke seeped into the gums of my teeth as I cried for help. In the branches, I could see the many creatures that had made it their home. Unlike me, they didn't protest. Maybe they realized it was already too late. They just sat there, watching the fire spread. They wouldn't scream as the fire reached their fur and feathers, like captains going down with their ship. The smell of burnt fur choked me more than the smoke ever did. More fire from different directions. The crew was spreading out, making sure to get at every angle. Despite my struggle, I'd only managed to move inches. I couldn't dig and I couldn't push anything out of the way. I was stuck and the flames were getting closer. The heat stuck to the smoke, tainting the sweat pouring out of my forehead. I was gonna burn alive in that hole and they were never going to know. And no matter how much I screamed or cried or begged, they couldn't or wouldn't hear me. Then the fire reached my legs. That first burn seeped through my shoes. At that moment, the sting on my hand shot through my nerves, something cold. My eyes were wide open, but I had the sensation of opening them again, like there was a second layer to my vision. And all of a sudden, I wasn't inside that nest anymore. I was on the outside, right next to the crew, being held back by two of Michael's guys. "Calm the fuck down," one of them demanded. "What the fuck's wrong with you?" They held an arm each, having wrestled me to the ground. "The fire," I gasped. You were killing me. You're killing me." "We're almost done," the other man said. "You need to calm down." One of them looked up. He slowly let go of my arm. Seconds later, the other did too. I looked up, seeing the crew spread out across the hills surrounding the pile, their silhouettes outlined by the fire starters in their hands. Something was coming out of the nest. The closest thing I can describe it as is a centipede. But you must understand, this thing was the size of a tiger. A massive white thing, segmented with arm-long antennae at the front and rear. It moved slowly, each twitch of a leg calculated and deliberate. It had black patches on its chitin where the fire had licked it. And even now, it could move at breakneck speed if need be. The eyes crew murmured. A couple took pictures. Michael moved up to it with a pump-action shotgun as the others yelled at him to be careful. Part of me wanted to rush at him and tackle him to the ground. If I blinked hard enough, I could feel myself in the place of that creature. I could feel myself crawling in its place in the dirt. Things got quiet as Michael raised his shotgun at it. My body rumbled as I felt the creature's trachea tremble. It wanted to be left alone. It was furious and terrified. Then a gunshot, but not from a shotgun. I don't think anyone had noticed Wilson walking up to us, pistol raised. He pointed it at Michael and spoke. As he did, something twitched in my arm. It was as if I knew the words before Wilson said them, like I felt them. "I want to go," Wilson said. "I just want to go away." I mouthed the words along with him and noticed again how Wilson's eyes were closed, just like when he'd thrown branches onto the pile. "Wilson," Michael called back. "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" "Let me go," Wilson and I muttered. "Let me go away." "Then fucking go," Michael yelled back, turning his attention back to the creature. The centipede moved as Michael raised his shotgun. Wilson raised his pistol, and as Michael took his shot, all hell broke loose. The shotgun went wild as a bullet grazed Michael's arm. Someone returned fire. Wilson kept shooting, seemingly at random. I think someone got him in the leg. Michael took another shot at the centipede, but it slithered away, rushing for the woods. A couple more shots rang out. Maybe a couple of them hit, but nothing decisive. The thing just kept going, and in the dark of the woods, even a startling white color can disappear. I stayed on the ground, writhing. I was scared, uncomfortable, cold, and at the same time sweating. "Let me go," I muttered. "I'll go somewhere else." I knew Wilson said it too. I know the remaining birds said it. It was sung and whispered and chittered in every living thing in 1,000 different ways. And it would be said over and over and over as they all waited patiently to burn. By morning, the nest was a smoldering heap. Michael had only been grazed by the bullet, but one of his crewmen drove him to the hospital. Wilson had taken a shot to his left leg, but couldn't recall why or by whom. In the end, they all decided to just keep things quiet. An illegal burning and an illegal gunfight sort of canceled each other out. My job was made very simple as the claim was canceled, nothing more to investigate. My superiors weren't exactly pleased, but at least it was cleanly resolved and I hadn't made things worse. They didn't involve the insurance companies, and there were no accusations leveled against surrounding logging companies. No suspicion of foul play. On paper, there was nothing out there but unfortunate natural circumstances. A couple of years have passed since. While the strange wound on my hand has healed, I still feel a little twitch every now and then, especially when I'm out in the woods. I might pick up the occasional stick without noticing or turning my head without knowing why. Ranger Wilson has since retired from his position, and I suspect this incident might have been the thing to push him over the edge. Looking back at it all, I know something is still out there. Whenever I close my eyes hard enough, I can still hear it asking all its friends for help. It's building a house, a bigger one, with more friends. Perhaps next time no one will notice it. Until they do. Story 3 ends here. Now, listen closely to Story 4. My dead dog came back to say goodbye. He wasn't alone. Vigo was with me for over 10 years. I got him when I was a sophomore in high school. I still remember bringing him home, a little boxer puppy in my arms. A year after graduating, I moved out of my parents' place to live with a couple friends. And he stayed with my parents while I lived in a 3-bedroom apartment that didn't allow pets. Eventually, one of my roommates met a girl. They hit it off and moved in together. My remaining friend and I moved into a bottom-floor 2-bedroom apartment. It was in a smaller, nicer complex that allowed pets, and I was finally able to have Vigo live with me. He lived with me for 6 years before his illness started catching up to him. Vigo started developing heart conditions 2 years before he passed. At first, he would lay down at random moments during a walk. Then I started noticing he would pass out suddenly while at home. Exercise soon became something he could no longer do. It broke me to see him slow down when he got older. He was always such an energetic dog. Vigo passed away suddenly while at home. I was well aware this could happen due to his pre-existing condition. But as much as I told myself I was ready, it is hard to imagine how you'll feel before it happens. He passed Sunday morning. The rest of the day was rough for me, and I couldn't bring myself to move his things. In order to try to distract myself, I still went to work on Monday and the rest of the week. I definitely overworked myself that week, all while dreading the upcoming weekend, the first whole weekend I would spend without Vigo. My roommate Zeke, noticing I was running on little sleep just by glancing at me, offered me some weed before he went out Friday night. As usual, I declined the offer. I'm in the minority nowadays, but I've never been the biggest fan of smoking weed. I much prefer to have a drink. "Come on, Tom, come along with us. Invite your girl, Emily," Zeke urged me again before walking out. "She's actually working late tonight. She said she'll come over tomorrow morning. I'm just gonna try to get some rest for now," I said, laying on the living room sofa and watching TV while he opened the front door. Well, suit yourself. Oh, and if you change your mind, you know where my stash is. I still got some pre-made joints I made yesterday. It'll help you sleep and likely put you in a better mood, Zeke said before walking out the door, shutting and locking it behind him. It was past midnight when I finally got up from the living room couch and headed to my room. Vigo's bed and empty bowls greeted me when I walked in. He had slept in my room ever since he moved in with me. All his things were still laid against the left wall of my room as if he were still around. "Good night, buddy," I said out loud. I then laid down on my bed and closed my teary eyes, trying to go to sleep. I gave up after tossing and turning for over an hour. Getting up, I walked over to Zeke's room and was greeted by a certain smell when I walked in. Zeke is most definitely a stoner who will dabble into other drugs, but only on occasion. He doesn't let weed interfere with his life and usually only smokes at home. Whatever I smelled in his room, though, that was not weed. It was a musty smell, and if I asked him about it, I'm sure his answer would start with, "I know a guy." Inside his room, I walked to his dresser on the far wall and opened the third drawer on the left. A medium-sized wooden tea box was tucked in the back of the drawer. I pulled it out, accidentally spilling a few of its contents, and set it on his bed as I opened it. There were various strains to choose from, all organized and labeled separately in small glass jars, Ziploc bags, and in different compartments. I pulled out the 2 bags that contained pre-made joints, looking for any that might draw my attention, also picking up everything I spilled as I did so. The contents of 2 of the 8 compartments had almost completely spilled out. One of the near-empty sections had 2 joints and another Ziploc bag that caught my eye, revealed only after spilling everything that happened to be sitting on top. Some of the herbs inside them had a dark blue hue about them. My favorite color is blue, I thought to myself before pulling one out of the bag. Making my decision like a child choosing his favorite toy or candy, I held the joint in one hand, putting the box away with the other. Grabbing the lighter and ashtray from Zeke's nightstand, I walked back to my bedroom. I opened my bedroom window to air out the weed that was about to stink up my room. After lighting it, I immediately noticed it did not smell like normal weed. I still held it up to my lips and inhaled a few times. My lungs burned. I started coughing and choking also because of the smell the smoke produced. It smelled like weed, but also burnt plastic, specifically like a shoe store that caught fire. The taste wasn't half bad, it was a little sweet. "Holy shit," I said, trying to fan out the smoke with my other hand. I stuck my head out the window before taking another huff. "What are you doing?" I thought to myself before walking to the ashtray and putting it out. I continued coughing for a few minutes before turning off the lights and laying back in bed. The smell was still prevalent, but I was starting to feel very relaxed, very mellow and at peace with myself. I'm not sure when I fell asleep. I only noticed I passed out when something woke me up. A moist sensation ran up my arm. I assumed it was Vigo licking my arm and upper hand. Licking was a habit he developed in his old age. It was a means to let me know he needed to go outside to relieve himself. He did this almost every night. I petted his head, not yet fully aware that I was touching my alive again dead dog. "Need to go outside, boy?" I said to him before opening my eyes. I then registered what was going on, jolted out of bed, and turned on the lights. The room, now illuminated, revealed that it was my dog, only he looked different. I was shocked. Vigo looked at me happily, using his whole body to wag his tail, something he hadn't done in a long time. "Vigo? Hey boy, what are you doing here?" I said, slowly getting closer and kneeling down to pet him. He was as happy as can be, leaning up against me and jumping around while I rubbed and patted his back. From up close, I could see his coat had a darker hue and more shine to it. This was my dog, just younger somehow. I held his head up to mine and saw the fur on his face was back to brown and black. His last couple years I had given him the nickname Little Ghost Face. Due to the white hairs that had accumulated on his head, he really did look like he was wearing a mask. I estimated this was the Vigo from at least 5 years ago. My dog was back in his prime, both happy and healthy. After playing with him for a while, I looked around trying to find anything else that seemed out of place or odd. I had to be dreaming, but everything felt so real. I looked out the window and saw that it was still completely dark out. The clock on my nightstand read that it was 2:20 a.m. I had only slept for 15 minutes at most. It felt like I had been out for hours. "Where did you come from, buddy?" I then asked, looking at him attentively. Vigo acted like his normal younger self for a few minutes before walking over to my closed bedroom door and scratching at it. "What is it? You actually want to go outside?" I asked him. He continued scratching at the door before excitedly letting out a high-pitched screech that answered my question. I walked over and opened the bedroom door. Vigo took off towards the living room. I assumed he was waiting by the door, but through the darkness I could see he was on his hind legs, leaning his front paws on someone who was sitting on the sofa. I then turned on the lights and instantly saw it wasn't Zeke. This person was facing away from me towards the TV. The back of their head was shaved and they had big hoop-like earrings. "Hello?" I said. "Who are you?" No response from the mysterious figure who was steadily petting my dog. Vigo was very happy to see this person. It was obvious he knew her and I had no idea how. Oddly enough, I wasn't afraid and proceeded to walk towards them, talking and asking more questions as I got closer. "Never seen you before. Are you Zeke's friend or something?" I asked, walking over and around the sofa. My dog looked at me and wagged his tail when I neared. From up close, I could tell it was a woman with a completely shaved head dressed in strange garments. She had a loose-fitting tan dress that almost matched her skin tone. It looked like it was torn to shreds with many threads and pieces of the dress hanging off all over. She didn't look homeless. What she wore looked ancient, like something some old civilization once wore. The lady gave me a soothing sense of calmness. Her gold earrings glowed with the minimal amount of light the ceiling bulbs produced. She smiled at me, or at least she would have if she had a face. She somehow looked familiar. There was a void where her face should have been, yet she looked like someone I had seen before. There was a protruding portion in the middle of her face that looked to be a snout. Despite having almost no facial features and not saying a single word, she seemed to convey exactly what she was here for. I knelt down when my dog came back to me after having been on her lap. Vigo spun and jumped at me excitedly, almost pushing me against the wall. I got up and he did the same. Standing on his back legs, he stretched his body up against mine. He held his head up and looked at me. I hunched to be face to face with him. Petting him while he stood, he seemed to calm down for a second. Not sure how I knew, but this was it. His farewell. He gave me one last happy screech and licked my face. Clearly told to do so, Vigo jumped off me before the mysterious lady stood up. She then faced my way and nodded her head once. I respectfully did the same. The lady never took a single step. She seemingly just hovered over to the front door and went straight through it. My dog followed her up to the door and waited, looking over to me. Vigo wanted me to open the door for him. I walked over, unlocked, and opened the door. What I saw was beautiful. It was some kind of vehicle, glistening and shining just like her earrings. She was inside waiting for my dog. Vigo ran over to it, whatever it was. He looked over to me for a brief moment and then stepped inside. I could still see them sitting within through what I can only describe as windows. The whole thing seemed to shine even brighter for a brief moment and then suddenly began to move forward. It wasn't until they had begun to move that I saw they had a third passenger. It seemed to be another canine. It looked out towards me from the back window and I immediately recognized him. My childhood dog, He passed away when I was 5. It was Cooper. His curly white fur and eraser pink nose were unmistakable. I smiled, for in that moment I felt truly happy. My girl woke me up the next morning asking why the front door was unlocked, what had been burning, and why I was sleeping on the living room couch. I looked around myself while I still sat on the couch. Had that really happened? I asked myself. Emily had found the joint in my room. There was no point in lying to her about having smoked something besides weed, which she was very obviously against. It didn't take a regular smoker to know that what I had smoked was something else. She opened all the windows in our apartment to air out the smell. About me sleeping on the couch, I told her it had gotten hot in my room after smoking and walked out to get some fresh air. I told her I had forgotten to lock the door before sitting on the couch and falling asleep. Zeke had crashed at a friend's house that night and got home after noon. Emily reprimanded him and demanded to know exactly what I had smoked last night. He laughed when he saw the bag that still had the other joint and said it was chunga. Neither of us knew exactly what that meant. Emily looked it up and asked me if I had any hallucinations. I lied, of course, and noticed Zeke looked at me with a slight grin. He knew I was lying. I never told her what I saw that night, but I know it did me good and gave me closure. Emily was obviously upset at Zeke, but she and I actually had a good weekend. I eventually told Zeke what I saw. He was intrigued, especially because the herb blend also contained a high amount of blue lotus. "Never go digging around in my stash again. If you want some weed, I'll give it to you personally," he said before reiterating that there are positives and negatives to taking most drugs and hallucinogenics. "They have their place in moderation," I remember he said in standard Zeke fashion. That was a few weeks ago, and I thought about what I had hallucinated fondly up until yesterday. I accompanied Emily to the funeral and burial of her dear Aunt Angela. Emily has a big family, and the funeral home was packed. I looked around, surprised at the amount of people that showed up. It didn't take long for me to notice it. I saw a similar entity amongst the crowd, more humanoid with no snout and of male composition. He moved past everyone, his torn and shredded robe flowing in non-existent wind. No longer under the influence this time, I was afraid. The specter stood by her casket. His ancient bracelet seemed to illuminate his surroundings. His faceless form looked at me no matter where I moved. It took all of me to stay calm. He was also present during her burial. He showed up riding one of those things. There were other occupants. I recognized a few of them from old photo albums of Emily's family. Angela was present during her own funeral. None of her relatives could see her, only I. She smiled at me. I then saw her walk over to the glistening craft. I saw her hop on board. I saw him take her away. Story 4 ends here, and now we enter the fog of Story 5. My nephew died and came back. He's been weird since. I'll try to explain this as best I can. I'm not even sure I fully understand it yet, but I need to get it off my chest somehow. I'm not Riley's biological father per se, but due to life circumstances I won't get into here, I'm his legal guardian until he turns 18. He's been living with me since he was 3. He's 7 now, and honestly, we couldn't be happier. Well, that was until a few weeks ago. Riley was at a birthday party and he fell into the pool. Help arrived as soon as it could, but his heart stopped for a little bit. They managed to revive him. He stayed in the hospital for a few days, but you obviously didn't come here to read about a first grader's near-death experience. You came for what happened after. When he got discharged, I chatted with his doctor. I thought we lost him for sure there. You gotta thank your lucky stars he came back. On the car ride home and at dinner, he was quiet and not as excitable as he usually is, but I understood, or thought I did. He just died and was revived, then spent 5 days in a hospital. Of course, he wasn't going to be himself. It was at bedtime when I first noticed something was off. I tucked him in and said goodnight. "You forgot to say goodnight," No, I didn't, Riley. I just said it. No, Riley said as I sat down on the end of his bed. She's here. You forgot to say goodnight to her. He pointed to the corner of his room. Okay, I had seen enough horror movies to know when a kid starts talking about some invisible friend, that's when you have to run. But at this point, I just chalked it up to him being loopy due to something the doctors gave him, or maybe it was his brain's weird way of coping with trauma, so I didn't do anything. I did stay with him. I slept on the rug beside his bed. That night, though, something weird happened. I woke up to some crying, assuming Riley was just having a nightmare or something. I groggily sat up, ready to comfort him. But when I looked at him, he was still fast asleep. The crying, whining almost, still went on, though. I rubbed my eyes and tried to wake up more, hoping this was just a hallucination from fatigue and stress. When I was more awake, I still heard it. Getting more wary, I looked around. It was dark, so maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, but I swear I could see a figure looming over Riley's bed. The next morning, I honestly tried to push it out of my mind. A few of our friends and relatives wanted to throw Riley a welcome home, sorry you died party. So I had to get him dressed and out of the house at a decent time. As I was getting our breakfast ready, I told him to get dressed and wash his face. He whined and said he was hungry now, but I assured him that it would only take a few minutes. He groaned and trudged to his room. I heard him crying just as I plated our food, so I called out and told him breakfast was ready so he could stop being upset. It was harsh, I know, and I regretted it as soon as I said it, but I was so stressed out with my job and almost losing him and all the hospital bills on top of that, I was just at my wit's end. He did come out of his room, tear-stained face, but he was holding something. In his hand was an apple. Riley, where did you get that? I didn't buy any apples this week, I asked. Plus, you'll spoil your appetite for the breakfast I made us. The lady gave it to me because I was hungry and sad. At first I was scared of her, but she told me that she's nice and won't hurt me, he said as he sat down in front of his eggs. That was definitely the weirdest thing so far. Even if it was an imaginary friend, I sure as hell didn't have any apples in the house, so somebody must have given it to him. At his party while he was playing, I spoke with Mary, the mother of one of Riley's friends and host of the party. And I know it's not totally out of the ordinary to see things late at night, but I could have sworn there was something crying and standing over his bed. I mean that, paired with his new imaginary friends and the apple thing, it's just weird. Sorry if that made no sense, I just haven't had an adult to talk to in so long. I finished my long rant, certain Mary would think I was crazy. You know, whatever it is, I really just think you're too stressed. You're taking care of a kid. You're working at the same time, no wonder you're seeing things. I wouldn't worry so much if I were you, just enjoy the party, she said. Speaking of the party, let's get all the kids ready to eat some cake. As the kids all gathered around, I did a head count and noticed somebody was missing. Riley. 1 second, guys, let me just go get the guest of honor, I said, running out to try to find him. It's important at this point to note that Mary lived in a pretty remote area of our town. There was a forest beside their house that the kids liked to play in, but I knew there were a few dangerous things in the woods he could be getting into. I called his name out but got no response. As I ran frantically trying to find him, suddenly I saw a silahoot. I wouldn't exactly refer to it as a cliff, but in these woods there was a fairly steep drop-off with a lot of rocks on the way down. That's where Riley was, standing motionless, almost in a trance. Riley, hey, dude, what are you doing? I shouted, pulling him away. He looked at me confused, his eyes glazed over. I don't know. He rubbed his eyes. What were you thinking? You could have fallen and gotten hurt, or worse, I said as I picked him up and began to carry him back. I wasn't thinking. The lady said to follow her, and then I don't remember. As shaken up as I was, angry even, I could see in his eyes that he truly wasn't lying to me. He seemed as confused as I was. The party got cut short after that, but as I was driving Riley home, I couldn't help but notice an apple tree in the cemetery down the street from us. I wanted the issue to just disappear after that, but it didn't. For weeks, I watched Riley, usually a really outgoing kid, become more and more reclused. He would spend hours in his room, and whenever I asked him why, all he told me was that the lady only wanted him in there. It wasn't just that, though. Strange things happened to me, too. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to check on weird noises, only to find myself physically unable to get out of bed. Like a force was keeping me down. I kept hearing that crying that I heard on the first night coming from all over the house. But what affected me most was my relationship with Riley. We used to be so close, now I felt I barely knew him. He stopped wanting to eat with me, stopped asking to read with me before bed. He just seemed distant, like he was just gone. It came to a boiling point last week. I woke up to go to the bathroom, but on the way back to my room, I heard Riley talking. I opened his door suspiciously and saw him sitting up in bed talking to nobody. "Riley?" I asked quietly, scared to make a noise. He turned around. "Who are you talking to, bud?" I stepped towards him uncertainly. "The lady. She's nice to me and says I can be together forever with her," he said. "Riley, there's nothing there. I don't see anything." "Come on, you have to see her. She's right there." I thought back to the first night when I saw that thing hovering over his bed. I really, really wanted to believe him. It just wasn't like him to lie. I focused on trying to see what he was seeing, remembering whatever I saw weeks ago. That's when I saw it. Like it materialized in front of my eyes, I saw what Riley had been seeing this whole time. I guess it almost looked like a lady. I mean, maybe it was a lady at some point, but not anymore. It was abnormally tall and bony with matted, dirty hair. Just as I noticed it, it must have noticed me too. It looked at me with its clouded-over eyes, its body contorting in unnatural ways to face me. I stood frozen in fear. "Don't worry, she won't hurt you," Riley assured me. "She said that if I go with her, then you would be happier because you wouldn't worry anymore." "No, Riley, I don't worry because you're here. I want you to stay. I trailed off, still looking at that thing. It tilted its head at me, and for the first time I tried to understand it. Riley's heartbeat had stopped for a bit. He hasn't been the same since. He kept talking about the lady. He stood by the drop-off, seemingly in a trance. The apple tree in the graveyard. That's when I got it. I stayed by Riley's side the whole night, terrified that the lady would try to take him back. The next day, I loaded Riley in the car, not even bothering to change either of us out of pajamas. "Riley?" I asked as I drove us. "The lady, when did you meet her?" He shifted in his car seat. "When I fell into the pool, I woke up and there she was. She looked less scary then. She wanted to stay with me forever, but then I got pulled away, and the next thing I remember, I was in the room with all the doctors." "Interesting, bud. Very interesting," I said as we pulled into our destination, the graveyard. I took Riley's hand and we rushed to the apple tree. Or rather, the gravestone beside the tree. Abigail Wallinson, 1892 to 1920, died by broken heart following death of her infant. There was a stone carving on her on the grave. It was chipped and covered in moss, but I knew where I had seen her face before. Yup, there she was. I took a deep breath. "Okay, Abigail, I'm not entirely sure how this works, but you seem to follow my nephew wherever he goes. So I assume you can hear me. I know you love Riley. I do too. He's a special boy, but you can't take him. It's not his time yet, please. You know how hard it is to lose a baby. Don't let that happen to anybody else." I'm not really sure what I expected. Riley looked around. Once again, I saw her. She looked much more human now that I knew who she was. I could see sadness in her eyes as she stared at me. "Please," I begged. "You just can't take him away from me, not yet." She looked at him, then back to me and nodded her head. I froze momentarily as she reached out to me with her bony gray hand, but tried to power through the fear. She opened her mouth. "You ... She stuttered, seemingly unsure if she could even speak anymore. "You love him, my boy." After that, things were much more peaceful. Riley came out of his shell again. I was marginally less stressed at work, and overall, both of us were happier. It's not like the lady disappeared. I catch a glimpse of her out of the corner of my eye when tucking Riley in. I hear Riley giggle to himself when nobody is playing with him. I feel a cold, icy hand on my shoulder when I'm stressed. I know I can't protect him forever. One day he will be hers, but not anytime soon. For now, all I can do is hope Riley is happy with both of his caretakers. Story 5 ends here now. Settle in for story 6. The hotel at the end of the world. I work at a hotel at the end of the world. You probably think I mean I work at a hotel in the middle of nowhere. That would be incorrect. Then you assume I mean a dumpy room and board where you stay when your wife kicks you out for the 7th time. Again, incorrect. What I mean is that I quite literally work at a 4-star establishment at the edge of the whole wide world, on a cliff overlooking the blank black void of eternal nothingness, from which disembodied voices screech on the blackest of nights. Oh, and from which moderately perturbed voices moan on the not-so-blackest of nights. Before we get started, some ground rules. First, I'm not here to confirm or deny the whole flat earth theory, so don't even ask. Just don't. Second, I can't tell you where the hotel is located. Sorry, my uncle included that as a clause in my employee contract. Third, I may change certain names and dates to protect the identities of our guests. Because of HIPAA and FERPA laws and such. Or was it Furby laws? In all honesty, I'm not 100% sure those apply to bellhops. Frankly, the only reason I'm writing this is because the usual night receptionist got mono from kissing the entire kitchen staff at one of the summer parties, and my uncle's having me fill in for a few weeks. It gets boring at night with nothing to do. Real boring. I thought I might as well write about one of the weirder repeating guests who tried to check in a few nights ago. Weird is a spectrum here. Quite a few of the guests would fit into that category, but some more than others. We do get lots of your typical guests. Humans on business retreats, lost hikers, blood eaters on family vacations. But we also get a lot of things coming to die, like people with terminal cancer or spider people whose legs are already starting to curdle inwards. Don't even get me started on the amount of elderly dogs that hobble in here coughing up blood. As my uncle explains it, like calls to like. Things at the end tend to seek out other ends, for example, hotels constructed at the teetering edge of the precipice of nothingness. Things crawling here to die are so common there's a whole chapter in the employee handbook on it. It covers things like disposing of the bodies and what to do if they're taking longer than expected to kick the can, and smart times to throw things into the void versus times that might aggravate the things in it to come out. Blessedly, cleanup is Cousin Lenny's job. I don't get paid enough for that. I'm getting off track. The guest. This was a few days ago, but it was 2, maybe 3 in the morning when the automatic front doors slid open. I looked up from my book, Crime and Punishment for those interested, but nobody was there. The doors just do that sometimes. They slid open and closed 2 more times. I stopped bothering to look up. When it happened another few times, though, I figured it was time to call maintenance or manually lock them myself. I set down the book and the man with only a mouth stood right in front of the desk. Okay, I know that sounds ominous. referring to somebody by a vague, spooky description, but the only reason we didn't use a name is because he's never given us one. Probably that has to do with his lack of ears, eyes, or usual mode of receiving questions such as, "Hey, what's your name?" Just one overlarge, smiling mouth. Nobody, not even my uncle, has ever been totally sure if he can hear us, though he usually tends to get the drift when we tell him, "Get out of here. Rooms are for paying customers." I'd never actually turned him away before, but I'd seen others do it enough times to copy what they usually said. No face, no service. He stood there smiling. "I'm serious," I said. "No freeloaders. Anyways, we're all booked for tonight." A lie. He leaned towards me across the counter. "Look," I lowered my voice. "This is my first week at the front desk. I'd really love if my uncle decided to make this promotion permanent, meaning no incidents on my watch. Can you kindly leave like usual, please?" I waited a few seconds, then, "I'll even throw in a complimentary personal toothpaste." The man with only a mouth smiled wider, slid the toothpaste off the counter, then walked back out the automatic doors. Easy. I grabbed one of Uncle's Dr. Peppers from the employee fridge to congratulate myself on a job well done. I could do this receptionist thing. Maybe my luggage-lugging days really could be over. A $3 an hour raise and a desk job, that would be the life. The rest of my shift continued without issue. I signed off at 8 in the morning and checked myself into one of the spare rooms to crash the next few hours until my next shift started at noon. One of the joys of family business, crappy work schedules you can't say no to. The blackout curtains were pulled tight. The AC was clunking away. I'd nearly drifted off when my eyes jerked open. Something was wrong. I could sense it. It took a full minute of laying there still, listening, to realize what it was. Every time I breathed, something breathed with me. It wasn't a perfect match. There were slight inconsistencies to it, like an echo, enough I was absolutely sure. Something was next to me in the bed. It was nearly pitch black with the curtains, but the glow from the bedside clock shed just enough light for me to shift to my side and make out the glint off a set of perfect smiling teeth. The man with only a mouth stared at me. Stared in a hypothetical sense of the word, that is. He was on his side, facing me, inches from my own face, on the open side of the bed. Waiting. I yawned as if merely readjusting positions and forced my eyes closed. As much as I wanted to spring from the bed and run for the door, I couldn't. I was stuck here, pretending to be asleep, feeling his breath on my face. See, this has happened before. Even if the man with only a mouth did offer to pay for a room, we probably wouldn't let him. My uncle has a pretty strict no murdering the other guests policy that the man has broken more than a few times over the years. The nights he shows up, we make sure every guest has only the exact amount of bed spots they need in their rooms. 4 guests? That would be 2 queens. 1 guest? A single twin. Somebody in your party dropped out at the last minute? You're getting a different room. If there's any spots left over or any empty beds, the man with only a mouth views it as an open invitation. Some of the less human visitors operate by less standard rules than people do. This is just one of his. If it's just an extra bed in your room, it's not so bad. Guests usually report a faceless man grinning at them from under the sheets, but no deaths. If it's an open spot in your own bed, though, let's just say the reports are more on the cannibalistic side of that spectrum. If you were thinking about lying about your guest count on your next visit to avoid the upcharge, this is your gentle reminder that honesty always results in less blood. Before you call me an idiot in the comments section for booking myself a room that would break a rule I already knew about, my defense is this. I thought it only applied to guests, not employees. Turns out this was an everyone rule. Whoops. I lay there for 10-ish minutes. The whole time my eyes stayed closed, those always went first from the reports. Eyes, then the ears, next the nose, and then the rest of you. All of it sliding through those wide, pearly-gated jaws. Pretend you're asleep, my uncle's told me before. He never does anything until the guest wakes up. But of course, every guest does have to wake up eventually. What would I do? Pretend to be asleep forever? Ridiculous. Well, that's what I tried. It was actually working, I'll have you know, all up until something long and slimy lapped at my nose. I let out a gentle snore. The tongue probed down the arch of my nose. I sleep-stretched. The wet thing moved with me. It fingered, tongued, each nostril with impatience. The man with only a mouth wanted to speed things along. Even with eyes closed, I could imagine that smile under the covers beside me. As much as I wish I could claim unfaltering calmness in the throes of the tempest, I was about a sneeze away from Gonzo. The tongue was just entering my left nostril, and no, absolutely not, that was not about to happen. No, sir. Somebody knocked on the door. I threw off the covers and bolted for it. "Room service," my cousin Francis started, then realizing it was just me. "Oh, hey. You're supposed to book this under Uncle's name if it's just for a break between shifts," he told me. "Syrup on the sheets," I said. "A guest must have left it open. It's dripping everywhere." Francis' eyes sprung open. "What? Where?" I led him into the entirely empty bed. He leaned over, examining it. I shoved him over and pinned him down. Perf, he started, face full of pillow, but I cut him off. "Man with only a mouth." I climbed in beside Francis. "He was just in here a second ago. Sorry, I couldn't risk him coming back while I explained." "Ah, come on." Janitor crew was already short-staffed. I was assigned this whole floor by lunch. Hey, nobody knows when you've changed the sheets anyways. Then I pulled the blankets back over me, and Francis, still grumbling, settled in for an early nap. See, you can't cut your stay short if you invite in the man with only a mouth. He knows the bookings, and as we always explain to our guests who demand a room change, he does not like your stay going short. Sleep until you were planning. Okay, it's almost 6 in the morning and people are already starting to check out. I'll end there, but let me know if there's any questions you want answered for my next post. I'll try to write during my upcoming night shift. Oh, and please remember, one day you might decide to come visit the hotel at the end of the world. Maybe it will be for a family vacation. Maybe your doctor's just given you an unpleasant diagnosis, but whoever you are, whatever the reason may be, this is your formal reminder about one of our most important rules.